All right, thank you very much, everybody. We're ready to get started on our next panel. We're excited today to have a conversation about rural water infrastructure. Access to affordable, clean drinking water, indoor plumbing, and wastewater services is critical to healthy and vibrant rural communities. Not only does it impact the quality of life of every citizen on a daily basis, it is a basic necessity for economic development efforts as well. Rural communities without sustainable water and wastewater systems are not sustainable themselves, but rural communities and households struggle to develop and maintain water and wastewater infrastructure. Today's panel will discuss obstacles for rural water infrastructure and discuss the path forward to address those challenges. We have an excellent panel today. We're delighted that you've all made time to be with us and share your expertise and experience. And each of our panelists is going to go ahead and give a few minutes of opening remarks to let the audience know what their background is and what kind of work they do and their general impressions. And then we'll go into moderated discussion. So we'll go through the panelists first, and if you come up with questions while they're talking, go ahead and send those to the chat, and we will save them and make sure to ask during the moderated discussion section. So first, I'd like to introduce George McGraw. George McGraw is a human rights advocate specializing in the human right to water and sanitation in the United States. George currently serves as founder and CEO of DigDeep.org. And go right ahead, George.
Thanks so much, and thanks everybody for having me. I know this is weird, but this transition to virtual seems to be going really well. As Lauren said, my name is George McGraw. I'm the founder and CEO over at DigDeep Water. DigDeep is the only WASH, water, sanitation, and hygiene organization operating in the U.S. Many of you have probably interacted with other WASH organizations helping people get access to water in places like sub-Saharan Africa. Maybe your wife's knitting circle or child soccer team has raised some money for a well in Kenya or a hand washing station in Namibia. There are hundreds of organizations working on that problem abroad and only one working on it here, and that's DigDeep. I think one of the reasons for that is that most Americans tend to assume that this is only a problem in low-income countries, that communities without access to water live in places like sub-Saharan Africa or Southeast Asia or Latin America, when in fact more than 2 million Americans still don't have any access to running water or a flush toilet at home. And that number is probably lower than reality. It's based on some data from census and some other federal indices that tend to underreport in the communities that are affected by this problem, which tend to be rural communities of color. But we know with a lot of confidence that there are at least 2.2 million Americans who still don't have any basic access to water and plumbing at home. That piece of data actually comes from a new report that we published at DigDeep in collaboration with a bunch of other organizations, including the U.S. Water Alliance and RCAC, who I'm happy to see is on the panel with us today, and just a whole plethora of about 30 other agencies, organizations, and nonprofits. Among the findings in that study were that race is the strongest indicator currently of whether or not you'll have running water at home. Native Americans are 19 times more likely than white households to lack access to indoor plumbing. Black and Latinx households are twice as likely as white households. And while this is predominantly a rural problem, so I'm so happy to be talking about it here today, it's not in isolated areas where people live far off the grid by themselves. This is definitely a problem happening at the community level. This is impacting entire communities that have gone through some of the cycles of what we've been talking about all day, sort of economic disinvestment, crumbling tax bases, infrastructure disinvestment. But the vast majority of them have never had infrastructure at all. When we made massive investments in infrastructure, starting with the New Deal in the 1930s, these communities were either deliberately or inadvertently sidelined. And now they're trying to play catch up really with both hands tied behind their backs. At DigDeep, our work has focused really practically on the field, getting people access to the running water and sanitation that they need now. And we began that work on the Navajo Nation, which, as many of you know, takes up parts of Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. It's the country's largest Native American reservation, and about 40% of people there don't have access to running water. They have to haul water many on foot. They spend a tremendous amount of their monthly income buying bottled water, hauling it from stores, or even in tough cases, melting snow or hauling water from livestock ponds or troughs that might be contaminated with uranium or arsenic. I think the crazy thing about this problem is that we think it's not happening in the US, but it looks just like what's happening in Namibia or Kenya. Women and girls grabbing a bucket, walking out of their house a few times a day to pull out a gallon of water, bring it home, and make it stretch for the whole day. And often it's water that they know will make their families sick. On the Navajo Nation in particular, DigDeep is working through a program called our Navajo Water Project. And that is a community-led water and sanitation infrastructure alternative. It sort of borrows from the International Development Playbook. And what we do is we use this incredible untapped community resource, which are school bus drivers. They know the community like the back of their hand, and they have a big chunk of free time between their morning and evening bus routes. So in between those routes, they grab a water truck that we help communities buy and outfit and clean and test. And they pick up water at water access points, which are sort of public water system wells that DigDeep and our partners own or operate and maintain. The water's chlorinated, treated, stored. And then it's delivered in these trucks to off-grid water systems, which our team of water and solar techs install in people's homes. And those look like a 1,200-gallon cistern underground, a solar power unit, which powers lights and charging ports in the house. And that pumps the water into the house through a water heater and a filter and a sink and a shower and a toilet. And we do have some sanitation work that happens in partnership with IHS when we hook up bathroom additions that they have built. Really what this means is that these communities who have never had access to running water in rural America are getting it for the first time, and they're getting the same hot and cold running water that you and I enjoy. And oh, Lauren, I have been advancing the slides on my end. Have they been advancing on your end?
Yes, they are. If folks aren't seeing the images, it might mean that your connection's not strong enough, but you advancing the slides does it for everybody. So
awesome, great. All right, so to wrap up here, this is the Navajo Water Project. It's one of our first projects in the United States working on household level access to water and sanitation infrastructure for families that have never had it. I think the big takeaways are that we're going to have to get creative in many of these places where traditional water and sanitation systems won't work or have stopped working. That is something that we think about a lot with our partners at places like RCAC. But the good news is that water access is being extended across the country through programs like this one. They're a wonderful option for, rural America. And I'm so excited to speak more about them and so honored that you had me today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, George. That's great. Let's go to our next panelist, who's David Fletcher, a community program specialist for water and environmental programs at USDA Rural Utilities Service. He's remotely based in Caldwell, Idaho. And David, I'll get your, there's your slide. All right, go ahead.
All right, can you hear me okay?
Yep, perfect.
All right, thank you. Likewise, I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today, and it is kind of different with this virtual, but I agree, it seems to be working pretty well. Move on to a slide. Our program is the Water and Environmental Programs. A lot of folks ask, why is USDA involved in infrastructure? And our focus is on rural. For this, our direct program, we finance water, sewer, and solid waste and stormwater to communities or systems of populations of 10,000 or less. Last fiscal year, we invested about just under $1.8 billion in rural communities across the nation and impacted about a little over 2 million residents. Most of our borrowers or recipients are public bodies like cities and water and sewer districts. About 18% are nonprofit organizations, things like homeowners associations and nonprofit water corps. And then we also have work with the federally recognized tribes across the nation, and that represents about 2% of our borrowers. Our program is administered through 47 different state offices and hundreds of field offices throughout the country. This, apologize if it's not real visible, but this is just a snapshot of the program's impact over the nation over the last 10 years. And in that same 10-year period, we've done projects in over 2,000 counties in all 50 states, and also the four territories have impacted a little over 26 million rural residents that have received new or improved water and waste disposal service. Overall, it's about $20 billion has been invested. One of the things that I like to point out is the fact that the majority of our investment is loan. It's about 2/3 loan and 1/3 grant. The loans obviously are paid back. They're a much lower cost, and our program is set up to basically, we try to loan communities or give communities or systems financial assistance to where their rates will be at a reasonable, affordable level, consistent with similar systems, and then we use the grant funds to supplement those loan funds and get them a modest system. We really don't want to use the grant funds to get a Cadillac system, so to speak. We leverage the one thing that George mentioned, and the one thing that all of the funders recognize, is that the need exceeds the available funds that are available, or that are available for communities around the nation. And so we're always looking to partner with not only private lenders through our guaranteed program. Often there's a small percentage that's the applicants themselves have saved up money through rates, and they put money in. Sometimes when we're doing projects that involve new connections, there might be some connection fees that can help. And then we also do roughly about 17-18% that is other non-USDA funding that could be in the form of other loans from states or from the state revolving loan funds. Could be other grant funding, both on a state level or on a federal level. The other part of our assistance is we provide technical assistance through our technical assistance providers, like the National Rural Water Association and RCAC. And that's a critical component. One of the things that we've seen is, you can invest the dollars in the infrastructure, but if you don't have the qualified staff to operate and maintain those facilities, they won't be sustainable over a long period of time. In Oregon, here was just a similar map that shows the projects. And then again, this is the information just for Oregon. About $230 million invested over the last 10 years, 121,000 rural residents. And again, it's roughly 70% loan in Oregon's case and 30% grant. And then in their case, they had roughly 15% leverage. Some of the other programs that we have are set-asides, and these are all basically, for the most part, grant programs. We do have our Native American colonias set aside, a separate set-aside for rural and Native Alaska villages, along with several others. One that is also used quite extensively is our Emergency Community Water Assistance Grant Program, to help communities that have, for a variety of reasons, they lose that access to their drinking water, and so this grant program can help them in that case. Appropriations, our budget for this fiscal year is shown there. Again, the majority of the funding is loan funds with a significant portion of grant. And again, I wanted to point out the technical assistance is very critical to provide that assistance to various communities. The special initiatives, some of those that I'd mentioned earlier, like the Native American set aside and the Colonias grants, those are included in that set aside that overall totals about $68 million a year. And I apologize if I'm going through here pretty quick, but again, just wanted to give you the information. Talk about wanting to help rural communities. The information on the left is the national numbers from last fiscal year. The vast majority of our funding is communities of 5,000 or less, and if you go down to even 1,000 or less, almost half of our funding goes to communities of 1,000 or less. One thing I did want to kind of point out, bond market rate interests are actually at historic lows. Our information, we adjust, our interest rates are fixed, but they do adjust quarterly. And so again, these rates up, our market rate currently, or as of April 1, is going to be at 2 3/8. Intermediate, and it's based on the income of the service area, is 1 7/8, and then poverty, it's based on the income, and then if the project is alleviating a health or sanitary standards issue or concern, it's going to be at 1 3/8% interest, and these are again rates that have never been seen before. So hopefully we can, again, help as many folks as possible. A little bit of a delay here. There we go. One of the set-asides that we do have is our little search program that can help rural communities of 2,500 or less and that have a low income help with development, pre-development studies and costs. These projects are such that normally there's some planning that has to occur. One of the things that we've definitely seen is that Ben had mentioned this, is without that, local person, that local spark plug that's really driving the project, it's difficult for these projects to move forward. And again, that most of the successful projects are one, it's not something that's imposed from the top down, they're community driven. Another one that we have is our pre-development planning grant program. Again, we can help up to the 10,000 population, but again, it's another way to do that pre-development planning. And then I mentioned the Emergency Community Water Assistance Grant. This one, about 2 years ago, we actually increased the amount. The cap on this grant program used to be at $500,000, and what we found was, in a lot of cases, the need exceeded that, and so we went ahead and Congress was able to adjust in the appropriation so that we can go up to $1 million in this program, and it has been funded. We've put more funding into that program of late as well. Wanted to again reemphasize how critical partners are. None of these projects are completed without that local community or that system working, and then working again with not only our other federal partners, but on the state level, and in some cases private. And it's really a team effort when these projects move forward. And again, I just really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. I did want to mention, I know our Oregon State Director, John Huffman, is going to be on the broadband panel tomorrow. And then our program director in Oregon, Charlotte Bentley. And there's my contact information as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Dave. And unfortunately, John is not going to be able to join us tomorrow. He's a little tied up with some other stuff going on in the state. So just wanted to mention that. But we'll move along then to our next speaker, who is Ari Neumann, the Director of Community and Environmental Services for RCAC. Go ahead, Ari.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. Just to confirm, everyone can hear me?
Yes, indeed.
All right, very good. Well, like the other panelists, I really appreciate the opportunity to present today. And I apologize, I do not have slides. We here in Sacramento are on mandatory lockdown, and we've been trying to figure out how to get 150 staff in 13 states sorted out as we react to COVID. So my apologies. But actually, interesting, as we're dealing with COVID, one of the more interesting pieces that's coming out is just the real critical nature of having access to water for water and sanitation for hand washing. And really, if we're going to tackle this crisis, the key role that water plays. And so it's been very interesting and enlightening to experience this through that lens. At RCAC, we are a nonprofit organization headquartered in the Sacramento area in California. We provide technical assistance and training in 13 Western states, so pretty much from the Rocky Mountains west, and including Alaska, Hawaii, and the Pacific Territories. We provide assistance for water, sewer, affordable housing, economic development, and we also have a loan fund available that can help make critical loans to move projects forward, whether they're water projects, housing projects. We're capitalized at about $150 million. And as David mentioned previously, we're a technical assistance provider. We're a partner with USDA. And I think often when we think technical assistance, the first thing that comes to mind is someone to go in and turn the wrench with the folks in the water system and ensure that the valves are turned the right way. And we certainly do that, and that is one piece of what we do. But I think more importantly, what we really strive to do is build the human capacity and the human capital in the communities we work with. Last year, RCAC helped 522 water and sewer systems in the West, held 408 workshops for capacity building all throughout our territory. And really, our focus is not so much on solving the immediate problem that a water system has, but on really building their capacity to solve it themselves and hopefully solve future problems as well. We're also a contractor in a number of states throughout the West from state revolving fund set-asides, and I think one of the key points I wanted to make here today was a lot of states are using those set-asides for a variety of purposes, and I wanted to highlight a couple of interesting things that we've seen on the state revolving fund side. In many states, there's a contract set up for technical assistance and training out of the SRF set-asides, and in numerous states we've seen some variety of operator certification training for water operators, technical assistance targeted at specific water systems. A lot of times it's compliance focus, ensuring that those water and sewer systems are staying in compliance, and also helping them access those state revolving fund dollars. Workforce development is also something we're seeing. I know there's a lot of conversation here in California with Sacramento State University, the California State Water Resources Control Board, the California Rural Water Association, and RCAC, and we're all trying to figure out, it's estimated that about 2/3 of the water workforce and certified operators are going to be retiring over the next 5 to 10 years. And so how are we going to prepare the next generation of workers who will be able to work in those small communities and ensure that the water continues to flow? the SRF set-asides are one opportunity to do that. Department of Labor at the federal level also has some programs on workforce development, and we're really looking at partnering with community colleges or state colleges like Sacramento State on workforce development programs to ensure that we have that next core group of operators that'll be able to run these systems. We're also seeing a number of states moving to a joint application for state revolving fund and USDA funds. So as David walked through a lot of those programs that they offer, for a long time there were slightly different requirements for the different programs, and small low-income communities are often, the water systems run by 1 or 2 or 3 volunteers who have very little knowledge of state programs, aren't necessarily good at navigating the paperwork. And so the fewer times they have to fill out an application, the better, as far as addressing the needs that they're seeing in their communities. And so we really have encouraged states like Montana have a single place where you send the resource in, the one application goes in, and then the funders can look at it and take a coordinated approach to figuring out how to pay for the project. Again, recognizing that no one funding source can meet all the need that's out there. Another innovative thing we're seeing in Idaho with the state revolving fund is they have used some of the, I believe it's the revolved fund, so after the payments come back from the communities, for a household septic program where they're actually able to help homeowners rehabilitate and replace septic tanks that are failing for individual households. And that really provides a great opportunity for the folks like George mentioned who are not necessarily served by that centralized sewer system like we often think of as traditional infrastructure in this country. And lastly, I just want to highlight, some efforts a number of states are making. We've seen in Washington, New Mexico, California, for what we call regionalization. Some folks call it consolidation. I will say in all of our work in rural areas, consolidation kind of has a negative connotation. So we prefer the term regionalization. And that really runs a spectrum from a sort of informal collaboration among utilities, maybe sharing a backhoe, that sort of a thing, to all the way to like a full physical consolidation of 2 utilities where we actually run pipes that connect them. And the goal there is really recognizing that a lot of these small water systems don't necessarily have the capacity on their own to operate, but that if they're partnering with nearby water systems, partnering sometimes with the larger water system, we can really create some economies of scale to ensure that they're able to provide their communities with safe drinking water and sanitary sewer access. So again, not a solution in every case, and there's certainly a whole range of a spectrum from really informal to really formal on the regionalization side, but we're starting to see it in a lot of states throughout the West, and it's certainly a long-term solution that we think can enhance the sustainability of a lot of small systems. So with that, I want to just wrap up and hand it off to the next presenter, but I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that you all may have when we get to the Q&A section. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ari. And last but not least, we'll go to Adam Denlinger, who's kind of the final piece in this puzzle of folks that are working in water infrastructure. Adam comes to us as the general manager of Seal Rock Water District, which is on the central Oregon coast. Adam, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to make sure you can hear me.
Yep, you sound great. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Thank you. And like the other presenters this afternoon, I do want to thank you for allowing me to participate in today's event, even though we had to kind of restructure how this event would go forward. We're all learning to live life at a distance in different ways, so I appreciate that. A little bit about my background. Yes, I am the general manager of Seal Rock Water District, and I apologize that I don't have a presentation for you, so the folks attending this event today will have to just imagine where we're located. Our location is along the Oregon coast. We're central to the Oregon coast and between the communities of Walport and Newport. We serve a population of about 6,000 customers, and due to tourism, we grow in the summer months to somewhere just over 8,000. Our system is spread out to about 12 and a half square miles, and we do a volume of about 100 million gallons of water annually as we serve our customers and 2 rural fire protection districts as well. We also are considered by SDAO, that's Special Districts Association of Oregon, as the largest water district on the Oregon coast. And as such, we serve different roles in our local community. The district also serves as a representative with Special Districts Association of Oregon. I actually sat on the board of directors there. And so we serve member districts throughout the state in their effort to continue to support their community water systems. I also serve as a co-convener of the Midcoast Water Planning Partnership. This is a grassroots place-based planning exercise that's recognized by the Oregon State Legislature in the 2015 Integrated Water Resources Strategy. And I've had the opportunity to work with several municipal water suppliers in the Midcoast region. And what we're learning as a group is that we all struggle with the same conditions of meeting the needs of our communities with, in some cases, limited access to water supply or failing infrastructure. The last 3 years along the Oregon coast, we've struggled with water scarcity. And for many folks that are familiar with Oregon, and especially the coastal range, we receive an average of about 70 inches of rain annually, but we receive most of that precipitation at a time of year when we don't need it, and due to tourism during the summer months, when we need it the most, we struggle to meet that demand. So we really do appreciate the State of Oregon Water Resources Department in funding place-based planning so that we as a community in along the Midcoast region can work together to plan for the future water use in our communities. I also like to say that we as a water district have been fortunate to use partner funding through USDA Rural Development and Business Oregon Safe Drinking Water programs, and I'd be happy to talk about that more later on. Again, thank you so much, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Adam. And as a reminder to our attendees, you can submit questions at this point through the Attendee Chat. And we've got a couple in there right now that we'll get to as well. One of them is asking, are there resources to help rural communities identify their eligibility and work their way through application processes? Or is there any kind of one-stop shopping on the rural community's end to figure out what resources are out there? And I think we do want to talk about that, and maybe we can go down the line with each of our presenters today and ask, how can that funding become more accessible to meet on-the-ground needs? So I think, why don't we go ahead and start with Adam, since you probably have some firsthand experience with that, and let us know what you're thinking, and then we'll move backwards down the line through everybody else.
Sure, that's a typical question that we receive working with member districts in Oregon and cities. I think that the first approach to any municipal funding is to reach out to Business Oregon and the Infrastructure Finance Authority. They currently have a program that is called a one-stop program. And what's unique about that program is instead of your community or your entity reaching out to several funding sources, Business Oregon will schedule a finance summit kind of meeting, which they host in Salem, or if you invite them out to your area, they will come out there. And what you really get is the opportunity to present your project or your problem and or solution without any preliminary engineering in most cases, and have that discussion with funders in the room. And this is funders from, of course, Business Oregon, Safe Drinking Water, USDA Rural Development, DEQ, Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, and several others as they, as you work collectively to map out a funding strategy to help you accomplish the mission of completing your improvements. That's typically where I will begin the conversation with small rural communities and their leadership as they make decisions on how to finance and fund improvements. And what the real advantage there, and having gone through that program myself with different agencies that I've worked for, what you receive after that is a real funding strategy that is filled with scenarios on how best to fund your project and accomplish improvements to your system. And typically, at least it's been my experience, that when you get to that, once you've gone through the requirements and met all the obligations of the funders, that what was presented to you maybe you don't actually begin the project until 2 or 3 years later. But what I find out is what was presented at that time is actually the type of funding package that that community can use to improve their system. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Adam. Ari, do you want to take a stab at that question as well?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'll say in a number of states, we've seen a similar type of setup like Oregon has. Montana comes to mind as one where you kind of have, as long as you reach out to one agency, then they'll all collaborate. In other states, Nevada and California, both, they do what are called funding fairs, where all the different funding partners, federal and state, and actually some private sector banks and community development financial institutions will all present on financing options, and then have time for communities to come and share their projects or potential projects with a whole variety of funders and start making those connections. And both Nevada and California, they try and spread those fairs around the state so that folks can come to a local meeting and do that. The other thing I'll say is, as a technical assistance provider, we get requests all the time to help communities determine what they're eligible for, and that's a very common activity for us as a way to assist utilities.
Thank you, Ari. David, how about from USDA's perspective, what are you guys doing to help make sure communities are able to access the resources that are available?
Just kind of to build on what Adam and Ari had mentioned, definitely all of the states. Every state is set up a little bit different, but there are a lot of similarities. So definitely, I think the thing to keep in mind is get the funding agencies involved early and often. As Adam had mentioned, it is really important to reach out prior to completing the engineering studies and so on, so that the whole idea is that you want your engineer to do one study. You don't want to do, and kind of keep in mind that in most states, the funding agencies not only is participating in the funding fairs, but they're also working behind the scenes amongst ourselves to strategize and the different programs, just like that was mentioned, the state revolving loan funds that are actually funded by a capital grant from EPA, and then the states put in matching money. HUD has the Community Development Block Grant Program. The U.S. Army Corps has a program as well, and we're often working behind the scenes to try to strategize and how can we put together that the best package for the community that results in reasonable rates. And again, our agency has if you like, TurboTax. We actually have an automated application process that you can actually apply online, paperless, essentially, called RD Apply. Some states have actually partnered where, a community can give other funders access to that information so that they can download that application and then follow up with whatever minimal additional information they need to make their funding decision. But definitely get involved early and recognize that in the vast majority of states, the funders are working together to try to put together, again, that best funding package for the community.
Thank you. George, I'll let you take a stab at that question too, but then I also wanted to ask you, in the report that you referenced, you talk about community leadership and how that's key to building equitable water access. I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about what that community leadership looks like and how you recommend that it can be strengthened.
Absolutely. I might have you remind me of that question after I opine on the first one. Actually, I just have a couple brief things to add because the real experts are the other gentlemen in the room on this. Mostly DigDeep works with communities who have no access to infrastructure and for whom these traditional funding models won't work. As most of you in the room might know, and I think it's been pointed out a couple times so far in the panel, most of these are loan programs. And a few of them are grant programs, specifically, tribal set-asides for places like the colonias. But in most cases, for grant or loan programs, these small community water systems not only need a local champion who can, complete the application, run the program, find the certified public water system operator to keep the whole thing running, but they have to do the math to prove that these systems can become self-sufficient through billing. Basically, that the end users will support through rate payment the repayment of the federal loan or the continuing operation of the system. Right now, federal programs do not support operations and maintenance on small rural water and sanitation systems. And so I think that's sort of a key weakness. And our role as an organization is to build coalitions of other organizations working in this area in order to influence federal decision-making and state decision-making around that. In order to provide more unrestricted funds for these systems. Because what we're seeing is basically in a lot of rural places, including in the West, places that once had fully and well-functioning water and sanitation systems are losing access. In fact, in the report Lauren was talking about closing the water access gap in the United States, we saw that in the last census period, in 6 states and in Puerto Rico, more people lost access to water and sanitation than at the beginning of the study. So we're actually going backwards in some parts of the country. Many of those states are in the West. And that's because, people are moving, industries changing, tax bases are crumbling, there's a lot of capital flight, and there's simply not the end user there to maintain rate payment at a rate that'll sustain these systems. So I think we need to start thinking more creatively about what we're willing to fund, and we need to expand our economic horizons and think a little more broadly, not just about how these systems can self-sustain through billing, but how these systems, by providing people water and sanitation access, sustain entire communities, and how investing in these systems, whether or not they're self-sufficient, creates other economic benefits like a decreased health burden, increased access to education, decreased opportunity costs. We're thinking about that an awful lot with COVID right now. A lot of the communities we're working in don't have access to running water. I mean, this is a scary time for all of us. I'm sure all of you on the line would be terrified to spend a minute imagining what it would be like if you couldn't even wash your hands, or if you had to break social isolation every couple days to leave your home and go to a crowded place in order to collect water, or if you, on top of all of that, lived really far from a healthcare facility, or far from a healthcare facility that may not even be very good. So those are sort of the daily realities that are being faced right now, under coronavirus by these 2 million Americans without running water. And that's going to be a place where we're going to see some of the highest loss of life if we really see intense community spread of the disease over the country. Someone else mentioned that I can't remember if it was David or Adam, but someone mentioned that they have a sort of digital application process. I think it was you, David. One of the things we also mentioned in the report is that one of the most successful strategies here is in the state of Montana. They have a single online application from multiple agencies that are offering water and wastewater funding. And honestly, what we're hearing from the communities that we work with is that the application burden is so onerous for many of these programs that it seems more difficult than just getting the work done themselves. And so they won't bother with the application. Montana's made a step in that right direction. I think that's a great model. Lauren, will you remind me of what else you wanted me to talk about? And I'll be briefer, I promise.
Of course, no, that was really helpful. I just wanted to ask about community leadership.
Yes, of course. Another community we talk about in the report is the community in California's Central Valley, where there have been a tremendous amount of people who lost access to running water during the last drought when their private or municipal wells went offline because of agricultural pumping. In those places, the communities who were affected are predominantly Black and Latinx farm working families. And there's an organization there called the Community Water Center that is doing some tremendous work. And I really take all my talking points from them on this topic. We have a really advanced local political infrastructure for the way we deal with water in America. In most places we have water boards, which govern the way water districts or water utilities operate, and they're local and they're democratically elected. Unfortunately, in a lot of places in rural America, not many people know that these water boards exist. Seats can go empty or uncontested for decades. Often the people sitting on water boards aren't representative of the communities that are actually most impacted by failing non-compliant systems or systems that have gone completely offline. So what organizations like the Community Water Center does is that they do a survey of all the boards and the seats in play and what the representation of the board versus the community looks like. And then they go into these communities who don't have a voice on the board, but who are so impacted in an outsized way by the decision-making happening there. And they find, again, champions. That's what this is, right? It's American civics. You got to find your champion. And they resource them. And these might be, a 35-year-old Latina woman, for instance, who until now didn't know the meeting existed, didn't have a way to get there, didn't have the outfit to wear, hadn't been briefed on what the board might consider. But CWC steps in and provides her all of those resources, childcare, transportation to the meeting, a crash course in water management. And then she's able to step up, run, win election, and start to even get a salary in some cases in order to serve her community on these local water boards. And we have an incredibly complex, robust, and successful water system for a country of our size with our geographic spread. And I think key to making it continue to function the best for the most people is going to be to take these mechanisms that already exist and make them more representative of the people they serve.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to jump in on anything that George just said before we move to a new topic?
Well, this is Ari. I would echo George's comments and say it's absolutely critical that we have good leadership in those places, and then once we do get good leaders, that we build the capacity of the folks that are there so that they can tackle these big challenges.
Thank you. So we had one question in the chat that was, what are the certification requirements for water operators? Is it an engineering degree? And I think generally I'd be very interested in hearing more on your thoughts on how states can address the workforce side of this issue. So I'm going to open it up to whoever wants to take the first stab.
Yeah, this is Adam. I think I could probably talk about that. I do hold state registration in both California and Oregon in water and wastewater systems. You don't have to be an engineer to serve in the capacity of a water or wastewater professional operator. Many systems, probably the vast majority of systems in both anywhere in the Northwest are probably operated by professionals with certification that they've gained through the operator certification process adopted by each state. That's certainly how it is done here in California. Our system and all the systems on the Oregon coast here are maintained by professionals that have gone through the discipline and education to gain that certification. I can tell you it's becoming tougher for operators to gain that certification because that certification, the certification programs have been a little stricter in recent years. They're also affected by regulations, and so one of the prerequisites for maintaining that certification is that you have to attend trainings and courses that are approved by the state to continue to maintain that certification. And what we're finding and what we're dealing with in the industry with certified operators for municipal agencies is that most of those folks that we've relied on to obtain that certification and operate our systems are now at the stage where they're like I am. They're getting ready to retire in a few years, and so we're going to see a sharp drop-off and decline in the amount of certified operators, which is going to be an impediment for many systems. While it's nice to have engineers working for your system, it's not always practical, nor can most systems, at least rural community systems, do they have the capacity to and can afford engineers. So while it is nice, it's not necessary. The state does have a number of trainings for certified operators to prepare them for future testing.
Yeah, and This is Ari. I would just add two things, especially thinking that the state policymakers on the call that could help. One is transferability among states of some of the credentialing requirements, or, if you're certified as a level 1 in California, could you get a level 1 in Nevada, for example? A lot of states require you to retest in each state, which makes it harder to find new folks and bring them in. The second that we're running into, especially over the next few months, is a lot of states still won't approve online courses for that continuing education requirement that Adam mentioned. As we're moving away from in-person workshops, and a whole lot of renewals of licenses are going to be coming up in the next 4, 5, 6 months. Some states have embraced online training and will give credit for online courses for that continuing education requirement. Other states won't, and I think that's certainly one area where there can be some immediate impact in helping people maintain those certifications.
And this is Dave. I was just going to build on that real quick, just that definitely the level of certification depends on the complexity of each facility that the operator is operating in. And in light of the staff, a lot of the staff that is approaching retirement, I know we have supported through the National Rural Water some additional funds to help, and I know they are working on they have an apprenticeship program that they're working with, developing. I think it's in 23 states now, but the whole idea there is working with it's set up on a state level, but it's working in partnership with the respective state departments of labor to work with the utilities to try and help these utilities to be able to afford and train up new operators because this is going to be an ongoing concern moving forward, even without the current virus situation.
I'd like to ask one more question. I can't believe we're already at the end of our time. You guys have been fantastic. But we got a question in the chat that says, what have diversifying communities done to mitigate rural water concerns when expanding or developing recreation economies? And I'd love to broaden that out a little bit more. George mentioned that we talk about the sustainability of water systems, but it's kind of a chicken and egg problem for economic development in many ways, because you can't develop businesses or the recreation economy or so many other things without an adequate water system. So I just wanted to give you all a chance to share any thoughts you have on the specific question from the attendee, or the more general question of how are we valuing water systems, and are there examples that you can think of that where it's been instrumental to economic development, and the benefits might outweigh the initial investment, or however you'd like to respond. But we only have another couple minutes, so let's try and keep responses to about a minute each. And we'll start with George and go in the order that we began with.
Sure. I can just say really briefly that, that kind of thinking is so powerful. And if we can get ourselves to think about water as a more holistic resource that way, I think we'll be much more successful as a country at maintaining health and prosperity in rural America, especially as the economy shifts and we face new threats from things like COVID. The one anecdote I have to offer is that some of the most successful places in Indian country in the West aren't on reservations. They're on private land or state land just off reservations. Towns like Gallup or Albuquerque that really looked no different from, reservation territory when those reservations were settled. The difference, though, is that they had centralized access to infrastructure that was invested in by federal and state government, and that allowed them to build industry and tourism and trades. And so it is really an important way to think about using the resource. So I appreciate that perspective.
This is Dave. I was just going to, again, kind of build on that. I do think in our funding, if loan dollars are involved, typically there's a little more flexibility on if a community is building some excess capacity. But with the grant dollars involved, you know, we try to allow for reasonable growth, but the intent is we don't want to build infrastructure that will sit unused for years and in some cases decades. A good example, and I was going to be able to say from the Dalles just up the road in Little Biggs Junction, is one where Sherman County made a commitment and invested some of their own resources to help put in to fund a rural water system. And with fire flow for that, you know, it's basically a business community there along Interstate 84, but the lack of fire flow and the lack of a central community water system was impeding growth. And they stepped up, and we were able to put together a funding package with that, with Sherman County and that Biggs service district that here in the next year or two will result in a water system that'll hopefully allow that to grow. And even though there's not a large residential population, it is a main economic driver for Sherman County in Oregon.
Yeah, and I'll just say in the Southwest, we're seeing a lot of, you know, as water supplies don't increase, but we want to support economic development, it comes down to conservation and really putting in place strategies to reuse water, recycle water, find smarter ways to use water so that the amount that we do have can stretch further and further.
Yeah, and I think I would just end by saying that I appreciate so much of what everyone is saying, and especially George. I mean, right here on the Oregon coast, if we are going to improve the livability of rural communities, I believe the biggest hurdle we face is at the federal level, state level, and local level, is to change the narrative regarding the true value of water for the communities we serve. If we're not on the same page when it comes to the issue and the systems are not maintained or improved, there are some communities right here on the Oregon coast that are really not going to make it to the men's room. Let's face it, appropriately considered, water is at the heart of daily life for every Oregonian. That is never truer than right now in our country as we respond to the effects of this health crisis. The CDC is promoting hand washing as a primary preventative to contracting the COVID-19 virus. Take a moment to think about it. The next time you wash your hands, where would we be without clean, reliable, safe drinking water and sanitation? Do we really understand the true value of water? So I'd like us to consider, what are we doing to educate our communities about the value of this precious resource?